It all began in the most unexpected place, deep beneath an old, crumbling library, tucked away under the streets of a city that had long forgotten its own history. A dusty manuscript sat waiting for someone who could even begin to understand it. It had no title on the cover, just a strange symbol, almost like a spiral carved into the leather. Most people walking past would never have noticed it. They would see only dust, darkness, and the faint smell of old paper. But some things, as history has shown, have a way of finding those who are meant to discover them. The manuscript wasn't easy to open. Its pages were fragile, yellowed with age, and covered in a strange script that seemed familiar, yet utterly alien at the same time. Whoever had written it long ago had wanted it to be hidden, almost as if they knew that the world wasn't ready for the truth it contained. As the first lines were carefully translated, a story began to emerge, one that shook everything known about the Earth and its place in the universe. According to the text, Earth was never just another planet. For thousands of years, it had been deliberately hidden, secluded from the eyes of the universe. There were hints of ancient civilizations, far older and wiser than anyone could have imagined, who had taken extraordinary measures to ensure that Earth remained invisible to forces that might have brought destruction. The manuscript didn't reveal the methods completely. It only left fragments, puzzles that could drive someone mad with curiosity. But the message was clear. Earth's history, as humans understood it, was only a fraction of the truth. For the person who discovered it, the feeling was overwhelming. For a long moment, there was only silence, broken by the occasional creak of the wooden beams overhead. It was hard to believe that, for millennia, the entire planet had been kept apart from the rest of the universe for reasons that were still largely unknown. And yet, there it was, black ink on paper, telling a story that no one in modern society would have dared to imagine. The manuscript spoke of strange alignments, of civilizations that had existed long before recorded history, and of knowledge so advanced that it seemed impossible for humans to have created it without help. There were hints about energy sources far beyond modern science, about machines that could shape matter and protect entire continents. Every page seemed to whisper secrets that humanity had forgotten, or perhaps had never been allowed to know. The first question that came to mind was why? Why would anyone go to such lengths to hide a planet filled with life? The manuscript suggested that the answer lay in protection. Long ago, forces existed in the universe that had eyes everywhere, entities that sought to consume, destroy, or manipulate worlds for their own purposes. The ancient protectors of Earth, whoever they were, had found a way to shield the planet. They had made it invisible, like hiding a small flame in a vast, stormy ocean. And in doing so, they had given life the chance to grow, evolve, and survive. It wasn't easy to accept. Humans had always thought of themselves as the center of the story. Yet here was proof that there had been forces at play far beyond their understanding. The manuscript described natural disasters, plagues, and wars not as random events, but as carefully orchestrated moments, designed to conceal progress or shift the direction of history. At first, it seemed unbelievable, but the more one read, the more the pieces began to fit. Certain events in history, long considered coincidences, started to appear as deliberate moves in a much larger game. The manuscript didn't just speak of technology and cosmic shields. It also spoke of human responsibility. It seemed that the ancient protectors had left signs for future generations, hints that humanity might one day be ready to understand the full truth. These signs were scattered across the globe, in ruins, in caves, and in ancient writings that were often dismissed as myths. Some of the myths were true, the manuscript hinted, but the meaning had been twisted or forgotten over the centuries. Those who had discovered the knowledge too early often disappeared, their discoveries lost to time. Despite the mystery, there was an undeniable allure to the story. It was a kind of hope as well as a warning. Hope, because it meant that life on Earth was special, valued, and protected. Warning, because it implied that there were dangers beyond human comprehension, waiting for the day when the planet might be discovered again. The manuscript didn't claim that humans could control these dangers, only that they had a choice to learn, to grow, and perhaps one day to join the guardianship of their own world. It was during the process of studying the HFY manuscript that other strange things began to appear. Symbols carved into the walls of the underground library seemed to match those on the pages. Certain words, when spoken aloud, made the air feel heavier, as if the building itself was alive and listening. The person studying it couldn't explain why, but there was a sense of urgency, almost as if the manuscript itself was trying to guide someone toward a larger discovery. It wasn't just about reading words on paper. It was about following a path, a trail left by people who had existed thousands of years before any modern civilization. Curiosity led to action. Maps were consulted, ancient ruins visited, and whispers of long-lost knowledge pieced together. Each discovery felt like unlocking a secret meant only for those who dared to search. In a hidden valley in the mountains, in the cracks of forgotten temples, and in the sands of deserts untouched by tourists, signs appeared, symbols, strange machinery, and inscriptions that confirmed what the manuscript had suggested. Earth had been protected, hidden, and watched over. What was most remarkable was the realization that this wasn't just about history. It was about connection. The manuscript implied that humans were part of a larger story, one that stretched across time and space. The protectors of Earth had left knowledge not to dominate, but to guide. There was a message woven throughout the text, almost poetic in its simplicity. Knowledge alone was not enough. Understanding and care, cooperation and wisdom were what had kept Earth safe for so long. It was a lesson that seemed urgently needed in a world that often forgot the past in the rush toward the future. As the days passed, it became clear that the manuscript was only the beginning. Each translation revealed new questions. Why had Earth been chosen? Who had designed the shield? How had humans survived countless threats without realizing it? And most importantly, what would happen if the knowledge were revealed too soon? The answers were not in textbooks or popular history. They were hidden, layered in symbols, structures, and stories that had survived only because someone had wanted them to. There was also a strange sense of isolation. The manuscript spoke of Earth as if it were alone, a sanctuary in a universe filled with danger. It suggested that, for millennia, no one had noticed, or perhaps no one had dared approach. Humans had thrived, unaware of the wider universe and of the beings who might have taken notice if Earth were exposed. This isolation had been a gift, a rare chance for life to grow without interference, and it came with a responsibility. Protecting Earth, even unknowingly, was humanity's heritage, the manuscript seemed to imply. Whether they accepted it or not. By the time the first part of the manuscript had been studied, a strange realization settled in. This was no ordinary history. It was a story of survival, secrecy, and intelligence far beyond what had been imagined. It spoke of civilizations that had seen the world not just as land and sea, but as a living, breathing entity worth protecting. The manuscript hinted at a network of guardians scattered across time and space, whose purpose had always been to watch over Earth until the time came for humans to understand their own potential. And so, what began as a simple discovery in a forgotten library became the start of something much greater. It was no longer just about reading history. It was about uncovering the truth of humanity's place in the universe. It was a story that demanded attention, curiosity, and courage. Every step forward promised new revelations, but also new dangers. The manuscript had been hidden for a reason, and those who followed its path would soon understand why. The journey was only beginning, but already the world felt larger, stranger, and more mysterious. Earth was not just a planet. It was a carefully guarded secret, a sanctuary with a story that had been waiting for thousands of years to be remembered. And now, finally, someone had started to remember. After the discovery of the manuscript, the journey only grew more mysterious. The first part had revealed a hidden past, but it also hinted at something far bigger, something that had been carefully guarded for thousands of years. The manuscript mentioned guardians, protectors who had dedicated themselves to watching over Earth. No one knew exactly who they were or where they came from. Some of the words were vague, almost like a secret code, but they suggested a society so old and so hidden that the rest of the world had no idea it existed. Driven by curiosity, the researcher began to follow the trail. The first clues were symbols etched into the walls of ancient ruins scattered across distant lands. At first, they seemed random, simple patterns left by forgotten people. But as more ruins were explored, a pattern started to appear. Certain shapes repeated in different regions, across continents, almost as if someone had left a map across time and space. These symbols did not point to wealth or treasure, but to knowledge, to understanding, to something much larger than any ordinary discovery. The journey was not easy. It required traveling to remote deserts, climbing mountains where few had set foot in centuries, and exploring caves deep underground. Every step carried risks, unstable ruins, harsh climates, and the feeling that they were walking paths no modern person had ever walked. Yet, with every challenge, a sense of wonder grew. The places visited felt alive with history, as if the Earth itself remembered the people who had once protected it. Even the wind and the stones seemed to carry whispers of forgotten times. It was during one of these explorations that the first real contact happened. Hidden in a remote mountain valley, a small group of people emerged from the shadows. They moved quietly, almost as if they were part of the rocks and trees themselves. These were the custodians, the secret guardians the manuscript had mentioned. Their faces carried the weight of generations. Their eyes held knowledge few could comprehend, and their movements were careful, deliberate, as if every step had meaning. They did not speak immediately, but watched, assessing whether the newcomer could be trusted. When they finally spoke, their words were calm but heavy with purpose. They explained that Earth had been hidden for a reason, protected from forces that could bring unimaginable destruction. The custodians had been tasked with this duty for millennia, passing their knowledge from one generation to the next. They were not rulers, nor did they seek power. Their sole mission was to preserve the planet, to make sure life continued, and to guide humanity when the time was right. The newcomer listened carefully, realizing that everything they had known about history was incomplete. The custodians revealed that humanity's recorded past was only a small fragment of what had truly happened. Civilizations had risen and fallen not always because of war or disease, but sometimes because the world needed to remain hidden to protect itself from being discovered by dangerous forces beyond comprehension. Some events that had seemed tragic or random were actually part of a larger plan designed to keep the planet safe. Yet, despite the mystery and secrecy, the custodians were not cold or distant. They shared stories of courage, of individuals long forgotten who had helped protect Earth in small ways. Some had been explorers, others artists or builders, all unknowingly contributing to the planet's preservation. It became clear that every life, every choice, had the potential to influence the larger story. Even small actions mattered, and the manuscript had been a way to hint at this truth without revealing everything too soon. As days turned into weeks, the researcher began to learn from the custodians. They were not just keepers of history. They were teachers. They spoke of balance, of understanding the natural world, of recognizing patterns in human behavior and in the universe. They emphasized that knowledge alone was dangerous if it was not paired with wisdom. Many of the technologies and strategies used to hide Earth had been abandoned over time because they were too powerful to be wielded recklessly. The custodians explained that the secret of the planet was not just in ancient machines or hidden shields, but in the choices humanity made every day. During this time, the researcher began to notice subtle signs that Earth itself seemed alive. Certain locations hummed with energy, stones seemed warmer than they should be, and winds carried an almost musical quality. The custodians explained that the planet had been nurtured in a way humans did not fully understand. Life on Earth was fragile but resilient, protected not only by technology, but by the careful attention and stewardship of those who had come before. It was a lesson in humility as much as it was in science. Traveling with the custodians revealed even more mysteries. Some ruins contained strange devices that seemed to move on their own, powered by energies that defied modern explanation. Others contained inscriptions that, when read aloud, resonated in the mind like music, creating patterns of thought that unlocked understanding. The manuscript had hinted at these things, but seeing them in person was overwhelming. It was proof that the ancient protectors had been far more advanced than anyone imagined, and that their knowledge had been deliberately hidden until humans were ready. The researcher also learned that the custodians had rules, strict ones, about sharing knowledge. Too much, too soon, could attract attention from outside forces that might still be watching. Earth had been hidden, not just to protect humans, but to protect everyone who lived here. Revealing too much could undo centuries of careful work. The lesson was clear. Secrecy was not about power, but about responsibility. Knowledge without responsibility could be deadly, and those who had come before understood this better than anyone. But it was not all quiet and safe. Shadowy groups in the outside world were already beginning to take interest. Rumors of ancient manuscripts, strange ruins, and hidden devices had started to circulate. Some people were driven by curiosity, others by greed. The researcher began to feel the weight of urgency. Learning the truth was one thing, but ensuring that it did not fall into the wrong hands was another. Every discovery carried risk, but it also carried hope, the hope that humans could rise to the challenge, understand their history, and protect the world just as the ancient protectors had intended. Amidst all the exploration, there were moments of awe. Watching the sunrise over a hidden valley where no one had walked for centuries, feeling the wind sweep across stones carved with ancient wisdom, or listening to the sound of water flowing. Through a forgotten cave, it became clear that the world was far more mysterious than anyone could imagine. Humanity had lived on a planet rich with knowledge and hidden forces, yet so much had been forgotten. And now, slowly, the story was being remembered. The custodians taught that the signs of protection were everywhere, if one knew how to look. Certain structures were aligned with the stars, not for decoration, but for function. Some rivers and mountains were chosen carefully as natural barriers. Even the patterns of human settlement over time, which seemed random, had been subtly guided. It was as if Earth itself had been carefully prepared to survive, to remain hidden until the right moment in history. The manuscript and the guidance of the custodians also revealed something deeply personal. Humans were part of this story, not just observers. Every choice mattered. Every life had the potential to influence the balance of the planet. The researcher realized that curiosity was not just about learning history. It was about understanding responsibility, protecting knowledge, learning from the past, and preparing for the future were duties that had been entrusted to every generation, whether they knew it or not. As the second part of the journey ended, there was a sense of connection, of purpose, and of awe. Earth was not simply a planet in space. It was a sanctuary, carefully guarded by those who had come before. And now, slowly, humans were beginning to understand why. The story was far from over. The manuscript was only the first clue. The custodians were guides, not just to history, but to the understanding that humanity's actions mattered in ways that went far beyond ordinary life. The lessons of the ancient guardians were clear. Knowledge alone was not enough. Curiosity must be paired with care, and understanding history was only the first step towards safeguarding the future. And in the quiet valleys, high mountains, and hidden caves, the echoes of millennia-long protection still lingered, waiting for those ready to listen. As the researchers spent more time with the custodians, a sense of both wonder and unease began to grow. The manuscript had hinted at dangers beyond human understanding, but now, hearing the stories from those who had guarded Earth for generations, it became clear that these were not just myths or legends. Something truly powerful had once threatened the planet, something that had forced civilizations to hide and take extraordinary measures to survive. The custodians spoke of it carefully, as though naming it aloud could summon it. They called it the entity, a force that existed far beyond the limits of human comprehension. It was not alive in the way humans understood life, but it could sense, pursue, and destroy. Long ago, this entity had roamed through the universe, consuming or destroying anything that could resist it. Some planets had disappeared entirely, leaving no trace of life or history behind. Earth had been next, and the thought of what could have happened sent a chill through anyone who truly considered it. The manuscript had described a time when Earth was vulnerable. The early protectors had been aware of the entity's approach, and humanity, though still young and fragile, had been given a chance to survive. The custodians explained that the shields and hidden networks were not just technological marvels. They were part of a careful plan to make the planet invisible. It was as if the entity could see worlds like humans see objects, but it could be fooled. Earth had been hidden, cloaked in ways that only the most advanced minds could understand. And it had worked. Hearing this, the researcher realized that many mysteries of history suddenly made sense. Sudden leaps in knowledge, ancient structures that seemed impossible for their time. Even myths that spoke of gods or powerful beings, these were remnants of the early efforts to protect Earth. Humanity had been guided, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, toward survival. Yet almost all of this had been forgotten, buried under centuries of ordinary life, leaving only fragments in stories, monuments, and symbols scattered across the planet. The custodians led the researcher to a place few outsiders had ever seen. It was a hidden valley surrounded by jagged mountains, with an entrance that blended perfectly with the rocks. Inside, strange devices and inscriptions filled the area. Some objects glowed faintly, powered by energy sources that defied modern science. Others seemed inert, yet there was a sense that they had once been alive, as though waiting for someone to understand their purpose. The custodians explained that these were relics of the ancient struggle, tools that had been used to protect the planet from the entity, and also to hide it from detection. One of the devices was a large circular structure, carved with symbols similar to those in the manuscript. When activated, it emitted a low hum that vibrated through the ground, and the air itself seemed to shimmer. The custodians explained that this was part of the planetary shield, a system that interacted with the natural world, the Earth's magnetic field, and even the energy of living beings. It was not magic, they said, but a kind of science so advanced that it seemed like magic to modern eyes. The shield had to be maintained carefully. Any mistake could weaken it and make Earth visible to forces that might still be searching Dot, as the researcher explored. The custodians recounted stories of the first encounters with the entity. Early civilizations had seen it approach from the sky, vast and incomprehensible, consuming everything in its path. Entire worlds had been lost. On Earth, the protectors had worked tirelessly, building hidden defenses, manipulating the planet's energy, and guiding human progress so that society could survive even while the danger loomed. Some of the greatest achievements in architecture, mathematics, and astronomy were not simply human accomplishments. They had been inspired, guided, or even subtly engineered to ensure survival. The realization was staggering. Humans had lived on a planet that had been carefully hidden, nurtured, and protected, and yet almost all had been unaware of the larger cosmic struggle. The researcher felt a mix of awe, fear, and responsibility. Everything learned in school or read in books seemed incomplete. History was only part of the story, and most of the story had been deliberately concealed to protect not just knowledge, but life itself. The custodians also explained that while the entity had not returned for thousands of years, it was not gone. Its presence could still be felt, like a shadow stretching across time. This was why the guardians had remained vigilant, passing knowledge quietly from one generation to the next. They had hidden the truth, not to hoard power, but because humanity was not yet ready to face it. Revealing too much too soon could invite attention, and the world was not prepared to defend itself. During this period, the researcher began to understand something profound. The protection of Earth was not just about technology or shields. It was about human behavior. The choices people made, the way they treated each other, the way they cared for the planet, all of it affected the strength of the hidden defenses. The manuscript had hinted at this, but now it was clear. The entity, or any similar force, would not be fooled only by machines. It sensed intent, harmony, and balance. Humanity had a role to play, whether it realized it or not. The custodians spoke of the warning signs that had appeared over centuries. Small disruptions in energy patterns, unexplained natural phenomena, and strange anomalies in the cosmos were all reminders that the entity might one day return. They were subtle, often unnoticed, but the guardians had learned to read them. It was like watching clouds gather before a storm in awareness that demanded preparation without panic. The researcher felt the weight of this knowledge. It was not a story of monsters or simple danger, but of a challenge that required wisdom, courage, and care. One day, while examining a series of ancient inscriptions, the researcher noticed something extraordinary. Certain symbols seemed to shift when looked at from different angles. Lines of text that had appeared meaningless revealed patterns, almost like a map of energy flow around the planet. The custodians explained that this was a record of the entity's path, its movements through space, and the methods used to divert it. It was a warning, but also a guide. Understanding these patterns was essential to maintaining the shield and to preparing for any future encounters. The more the researcher learned, the more the stakes became clear. This was not a story of ancient civilizations lost to time. It was a story of survival, vigilance, and responsibility. Every discovery carried significance, and mistakes could have consequences that spanned centuries. Yet despite the danger, there was also hope. The manuscript, the custodians, and the relics all pointed toward a truth that humanity could rise to meet the challenge if it understood its role. The researcher began to see parallels in the modern world. Conflicts, environmental changes, and the rush toward technological advancement were all signs that humans were still learning how to balance knowledge with wisdom. The ancient guardians had known this centuries ago. They had hidden the planet not just from enemies in the stars, but from the consequences of human behavior until the time was right. Earth had survived because careful stewardship, patience, and understanding had been applied across generations. Yet there was an urgency now. The manuscripts and relics suggested that the entity's return was not impossible. It might be far in the future, but every moment brought humanity closer to a point where vigilance would matter more than ever. The researcher realized that learning the secrets of the past was not enough. Understanding them, applying them, and preparing for the future was the real challenge. And this challenge was not just for the researcher, but for all of humanity, that the custodians emphasized that fear alone could not guide action. Panic, secrecy, or selfish motives could weaken the protective measures. Instead, knowledge had to be paired with careful planning, collaboration, and respect for the planet. The entity was not something to fight with anger or weapons alone. It was something to understand, anticipate, and outsmart. Its nature was far beyond simple attack or defense, requiring both intelligence and moral responsibility. By the end of this phase of the journey, the researcher had a profound realization. The story of Earth was not just history or mythology. It was an ongoing struggle, a hidden war fought in silence and secrecy. Humans were part of this story, not as passive witnesses, but as participants with the power to influence outcomes. Every action, every choice carried weight. The manuscript had provided clues, the custodians had provided guidance, and the relics had shown the methods, but it was up to humanity to understand the full picture and continue the legacy of protection. And so, the researcher left the hidden valley with a mixture of awe, fear, and determination. The entity was a reminder of the fragility of life, the importance of knowledge, and the responsibility that came with understanding the hidden forces of the universe. Earth had survived millennia because of the care, wisdom, and courage of those who had come before. And now, slowly, humanity was being asked to rise to the same challenge. The journey was far from over. The manuscript, the custodians, and the ancient relics had revealed the threat, but understanding it was only the beginning. Learning how to protect Earth, how to respect the forces that had shaped it, and how to prepare for the future would require courage, wisdom, and unity. And in the quiet moments, when standing among the Mo, after learning about the entity and the ancient methods used to protect Earth, the researcher felt both awe and a growing sense of responsibility. The knowledge was powerful, and with it came a weight that pressed heavily on every decision. The custodians had warned that not everyone could handle such information. Some might use it wisely, but others could misuse it, and in the wrong hands, even a small piece of this knowledge could be catastrophic. It was not long before this warning became real. Rumors of ancient manuscripts and relics had begun to circulate outside the hidden valleys. Small groups, driven by curiosity or greed, started asking questions, searching for hints, and even trying to locate sites mentioned in old texts. Some were explorers, seeking fame or fortune. Others were part of organizations that operated in the shadows, willing to use any means necessary to obtain power. The researcher quickly realized that the secrecy the custodians had maintained for centuries was fragile. The wrong person discovering even a small fragment of the knowledge could jeopardize everything. The first encounter with one such group was subtle but unsettling. The researcher noticed strange figures observing from a distance during visits to ancient ruins. Their movements were deliberate, and their presence seemed calculated rather than accidental. At first, the researcher tried to ignore them, thinking they were local guides or curious travelers. But patterns began to emerge. Maps, symbols, and even small tools from previously visited sites had been disturbed, leaving the unmistakable mark of deliberate searching. It was clear someone else was trying to uncover the secrets hidden for Millennia. The custodians warned that these groups were not just after relics or manuscripts. They sought the power that came with understanding the ancient methods of protection. If they obtained even a part of the knowledge, they could attempt to manipulate the shields, reverse the protections, or even attract forces that Earth was meant to stay hidden from. The researcher realized the urgency of the situation. It was no longer enough to simply study the past. Immediate action was necessary to safeguard the planet. The dilemma became clear. The knowledge held by the custodians could be shared, but only selectively and carefully. Sharing too much could reveal vulnerabilities, while keeping it hidden entirely could slow progress and limit humanity's understanding. The researcher struggled with the weight of this decision. Should the secret be revealed to the world, allowing everyone to prepare and learn? Or should it remain hidden, preserved only for those who had proven themselves trustworthy? Every path carried risks. Every decision could affect not just the present, But centuries into the future, meanwhile, the shadowy groups were growing bolder. During visits to secluded ruins, the researcher began to notice evidence of tampering tools left behind, symbols partially erased, and subtle traces that someone had been attempting to decipher hidden inscriptions. The custodians advised caution. Every time the wrong person gained even a small advantage, the delicate balance of protection was at risk. It became clear that these groups were not interested in history or knowledge for its own sake. Their motives were power and control, and they could bring harm not just to the researcher, but to the entire planet. Faced with these threats, the researcher began to work more closely with the custodians. They shared strategies for safeguarding the manuscripts and relics, moving them to more secure locations, and creating false trails to mislead those who sought them. Every day was a careful balance between exploration and protection. Every discovery brought excitement and danger in equal measure. Even small mistakes could draw attention from the wrong people, so vigilance became a constant part of the journey. At the same time, the researcher was learning more about the moral implications of the knowledge. The ancient methods of protection had been designed not just to hide Earth, but to teach responsibility. The custodians emphasized that knowledge alone was not power. How it was used, and the intention behind it, determined whether it would protect or destroy. This was a lesson that had been lost to humanity over the centuries. The manuscript and the relics were reminders that wisdom, patience, and care were more important than raw knowledge or immediate action. One night, as the researcher studied a series of ancient inscriptions in a hidden chamber, the weight of the decision became almost unbearable. The inscriptions detailed devices and energy flows that could either reinforce Earth's protection or, if misused, expose it to forces beyond imagination. The realization struck hard. Even a single misstep could undo millennia of careful guarding. The temptation to reveal the knowledge to the world, to prevent mistakes in the future, clashed with the undeniable risk that doing so could attract attention from those who would exploit it. It was a choice that required not only intelligence, but deep moral judgment. The custodians shared stories of those who had faced similar dilemmas in the past. Long ago, ancient protectors had debated whether to share knowledge with neighboring civilizations. Some argued that humanity could not be trusted, that revealing too much would invite disaster. Others believed that people should have the tools to protect themselves, even if it meant taking risks. In the end, they had chosen caution, hiding the most dangerous knowledge while leaving subtle hints for those who would one day be ready. The researcher realized that history was full of these moral crossroads, and now, once again, a similar choice had to be made. The pressure increased when evidence appeared that one of the shadowy groups was closing in on a major discovery. They had deciphered part of the manuscripts and were moving toward a hidden site that contained powerful relics. The researcher, guided by the custodians, moved quickly, using ancient paths and secret markers to stay ahead. The journey became a race against time, not only to protect the knowledge, but to prevent it from falling into dangerous hands. Every step was calculated, every decision weighed with care. The sense of urgency was palpable. During this race, the researcher also began to reflect on the human aspect of the story. These were not simply relics or manuscripts. They represented the hopes, struggles, and intelligence of countless generations. Protecting them was not just about safeguarding power. It was about honoring the efforts of those who had labored for centuries to preserve life and knowledge. The moral responsibility felt personal, as if the researcher had been chosen to carry forward the legacy of humanity's hidden guardians. Even as the danger grew, there were moments of discovery and wonder. Hidden devices that had lain dormant for centuries revealed their secrets slowly, teaching lessons about energy, balance, and harmony. Ancient inscriptions hinted at ways to strengthen Earth's protection without drawing attention. The researcher realized that the knowledge itself was not meant to be feared, but understood and respected. It was a tool for those with patience, care, and moral integrity. Those who sought it for selfish reasons could never succeed, because the universe itself seemed to resist misuse. As the chase continued, the researcher began to understand a deeper truth. The struggle was not just external, against shadowy groups or the unknown entity, but internal. Every decision, every choice, tested character, patience, and wisdom. Rushing, greed, or carelessness could destroy centuries of careful planning. Protecting the knowledge required not just physical vigilance, but moral clarity. The journey had become a lesson in responsibility, teaching that true power lay not in possessing knowledge, but in using it with care. Eventually, the researcher and the custodians reached a critical site, a place where ancient technology and human history intersected in a way that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The site contained mechanisms that could reinforce Earth's hidden shield, but it also held dangers if activated incorrectly. The shadowy groups were close, and the tension was unbearable. Every move had to be precise, every decision deliberate. The custodians guided, advised, and cautioned, but the responsibility ultimately fell on the researcher. It was a moment that defined the difference between wisdom and recklessness. As preparations were made to secure the site, the researcher reflected on the journey so far. What had begun as a simple discovery in a forgotten library had become a test of courage, intelligence, and morality. The manuscripts, the relics, and the guidance of the custodians had revealed the hidden forces that shaped the planet. But the real challenge was ensuring that humanity could rise to the occasion. Knowledge without care, the researcher realized, was far more dangerous than ignorance. By the end of this part of the journey, the researcher had made a choice. The knowledge would be protected, but not hidden from those who were ready to understand it. Carefully, selectively, lessons would be shared, while the most dangerous secrets remained concealed. It was a delicate balance, requiring patience, vigilance, and moral judgment. The shadows outside were still moving, still searching. But the researcher now understood that protection was more than secrecy. It was guidance, responsibility, and the wisdom to know when to act and when to wait. The moral dilemma remained, but clarity had emerged. Knowledge was not power unless it was paired with responsibility. The manuscript, the custodians, and the ancient relics were not just tools. They were reminders of the lessons humanity had almost forgotten: patience, care, and respect for the forces that shaped the world. With the shadowy groups temporarily misled and the ancient relics secured, the researcher finally felt a moment of calm. It was not the relief of victory, but the quiet understanding that the true work had only just begun. The journey through hidden valleys, ancient inscriptions, and relics of unimaginable age had revealed much, but Earth's story was far from complete. The lessons of the past now needed to be understood and shared, carefully and wisely. The custodians emphasized that the responsibility of safeguarding Earth was not theirs alone. Humanity itself had to rise to meet the challenge. The shields, devices, and hidden technologies were tools, but they could not replace awareness, care, and moral judgment. Every person's choices mattered: how they treated one another, how they treated the planet, and how they approached knowledge. In a way, the real protection was human consciousness, nurtured and guided, ready to act responsibly when the time came. The researcher began to realize the true purpose of the manuscript and the relics. They were not just records of history or devices of protection. They were a bridge between past and future. The ancient guardians had left subtle hints, lessons hidden in symbols, structures, and texts, designed to teach humanity patience, wisdom, and careful stewardship. The story was not just about avoiding danger. It was about learning to live in harmony with the world and with forces beyond ordinary comprehension. The first step was to document everything that had been learned. Every journey, every symbol, every energy pattern, and every piece of advice from the custodians was carefully recorded. The researcher knew that knowledge could be dangerous if misused, so it had to be presented with guidance, context, and caution. Each manuscript and recording included notes on how to interpret it wisely, with reminders that responsibility mattered more than ambition. This work was painstaking, but necessary. The past had been preserved carefully for centuries. The future deserved the same attention as the documentation progressed. The researcher reflected on the incredible human stories intertwined with the secrets of Earth. The custodians had shared countless accounts of ordinary people who had played extraordinary roles. Builders, artists, farmers, and explorers all had contributed in ways they never understood, shaping history and protecting the planet in quiet, meaningful acts. These stories were not recorded in textbooks, yet they carried a profound lesson. Heroism did not always require fame, wealth, or recognition. Sometimes it simply required patience, courage, and careful choices. While preparing the records, the researcher also considered the shadowy groups that had been searching for knowledge. They were still out there, curious, ambitious, or reckless. The custodians emphasized the importance of subtlety and protection. Some parts of the knowledge had to remain hidden, encoded in ways that could only be understood by those ready to act responsibly. This was not secrecy for the sake of control, but for survival. The balance between sharing wisdom and protecting it was delicate, and any misstep could have consequences for generations to come. Despite the looming threats, there were moments of profound awe and inspiration. Hidden chambers revealed the ingenuity of the ancient guardians' energy sources that had been carefully tuned to the planet, inscriptions aligned with stars, and devices that seemed almost alive. Every discovery was a reminder that humanity had been guided, shaped, and nurtured by forces both known and unknown. It was a humbling experience, teaching that survival and progress were never accidental, but built on careful planning, intelligence, and moral responsibility. The researcher also began to understand that the journey had changed them personally. Curiosity had driven the initial discovery, but experience, reflection, and responsibility had shaped a deeper understanding. Knowledge was no longer simply about discovery or adventure. It was about care, respect, and purpose. The moral lessons from the custodians became intertwined with every decision, every observation, and every plan for the future. Protecting Earth was not just a task, it was a calling, a role that demanded courage, intelligence, and compassion. As time passed, the researcher worked with the custodians to establish a careful system of guidance for future generations. The most sensitive knowledge would remain hidden, only accessible to those who could demonstrate patience, wisdom, and moral clarity. Broader lessons about stewardship, respect for the planet, and the importance of responsibility would be shared more openly, teaching people to act thoughtfully in daily life. The approach was subtle, designed to nurture understanding gradually, without exposing Earth to unnecessary risk. The custodians also emphasized the importance of observation. Humanity could not rely solely on relics and manuscripts. It had to remain vigilant, aware of subtle signs in nature and society. The entity or similar threats might never return, but the principles of caution, patience, and care were timeless. Learning to read these signs, understanding patterns in the natural world, and making choices that preserve balance were all part of the ongoing legacy of the ancient guardians. During these efforts, the researcher reflected on the broader meaning of the journey. The story of Earth was not simply about hiding from threats. It was about connection. Every discovery, every lesson, and every relic revealed the interconnectedness of life, knowledge, and responsibility. The past, present, and future were linked through human choices. The manuscript, the custodians, and the hidden technologies were all reminders that survival depended not on isolation or secrecy alone, but on awareness, collaboration, and respect for forces greater than ourselves, not one morning. While exploring a secluded valley that had once been a hub of ancient activity, the researcher noticed subtle changes in the energy patterns of the environment. Stones seemed warmer, the air felt charged, and small sounds carried an almost musical resonance. The custodians explained that this was the result of careful maintenance and attention over centuries. Earth itself responded to care and vigilance. It was a living system, protected not only by devices and shields, but by conscious stewardship. The realization reinforced the importance of every choice humans made, no matter how small. The researcher also began to see a path forward for humanity. The lessons from the past were clear. Knowledge without responsibility was dangerous, but knowledge with care could protect life and nurture progress. The future depended not on secrecy alone, but on cultivating wisdom, patience, and moral clarity in every generation. Humanity had been given a chance, guided by forces that had acted for millennia. And now it was up to people to rise to the challenge. Slowly, the researcher shared selected knowledge with a small circle of trusted individuals, those who could understand, apply, and protect it wisely. These individuals became the next link in the chain of guardianship, learning from the custodians while preparing for a future where Earth could be safeguarded without exposing its secrets recklessly. Each lesson was paired with moral guidance, emphasizing that the true value of knowledge lay not in power, but in care. As the final days of the journey approached, the researcher took a moment to look back at all that had been learned. From hidden manuscripts to ancient relics, from mountains to underground chambers, every discovery had revealed the depth, intelligence, and dedication of those who had come before. Humanity had been guided, nurtured, and protected in ways almost impossible to imagine. The responsibility now was clear: to honor the past, safeguard the present, and guide the future. The custodians spoke one last time about hope. Despite challenges, threats, and shadowy groups, they believed in humanity's potential to rise to the occasion. The lessons of patience, careful observation, and moral responsibility were timeless. If humanity could embrace these principles, Earth could remain safe, life could flourish, and the legacy of the ancient guardians could continue. It was a reminder that hope was not passive. It required action, awareness, and care before leading the hidden valleys. The researcher took a final walk through the relics and inscriptions, feeling the weight of centuries on every stone. The journey had been one of discovery, danger, and reflection, but also one of profound insight and inspiration. The manuscript had been only the beginning. The true story of Earth was ongoing, shaped by those willing to act with courage, wisdom, and compassion. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in gold and crimson, the researcher realized that the journey was both an ending and a beginning. The threat of the entity remained a distant possibility. Shadowy groups might still search for knowledge, and humanity faced countless choices each day. Yet there was also the power of understanding, of careful guidance, and of moral responsibility. The future of Earth depended not on secrecy alone, but on the awareness, courage, and integrity of those who chose to protect it. In the quiet, the researcher made a silent promise to honor the legacy of the custodians, to protect the knowledge carefully, and to guide others toward understanding and responsibility. The manuscript, the relics, and the lessons of the past were more than objects. They were a call to action, a reminder that every life, every choice, and every moment mattered. Earth had survived millennia of hidden threats. Now it was humanity's turn to rise to the responsibility, safeguarding the planet and carrying forward the legacy of those who had guarded it long before. And so, the journey concluded not WI,